Okay. Pull up my sound as well. Let me just make sure you all can hear as well. Testing, testing. Okay, I think that's a decent volume. That's good. YouTube chat's there. And now we just wait for the video to finally come out. Oh, man. Can you really not access Hive? Like I said, I don't think you... Yeah, you currently can't. I also need my phone to tweet out about this whenever it goes live. Now we wait. There's no... Oh, no. Absolutely not. They definitely don't. And that's where it's like... It's one of those that I think Hive is going to struggle early on. And the biggest thing that we have to wait and see is how many people actually start using it. Because I'll show my phone here to kind of give you the perspective. So looking at my Hive feed, so far there's one person that posts. For context, I only follow 6 people. So granted, I only follow people that I've met in person. But like Travis Gaffer posts once, and then a few one-offs. But for the most part, like the activity and volume on your feed is not there yet. And that's the big thing. It's like a lot of people might sign up for Hive. A lot of people might create accounts for it. But the question is going to be, do people use it? Because the thing is, you're not going to use both Twitter and Hive. They're the same thing. So at what point do people stop posting on Twitter and start posting on Hive? Also, discoverability is not great right now in Hive. It's all just based on people you know, which is a good thing to start, but eventually you need to be discoverable. Although the community building aspect is near impossible. But the thing is that people are literally just looking for a replacement for Twitter right now. So all you have to do is emulate most of the features there. And you're fine. I want to see what this game is like, by the way, because I find it hard to believe that another MOBA would come and take anything's place. But, oh, Hold up. Let me open that off stream. Uh-oh. I think it's up. Is it publicly up or? Aha! What do we have here? Look at this. We got the video. Hold up. Let me just subscribe to Jay real quick. Just to make sure he knows that before I even do anything. Make sure I drop a like. Let's get the tweet out about it. Need to pump up the social media. Okay. Okay, there we go. Alright, time to post my TikTok video and then we'll react. Sorry, I just have to get all the stuff out before anything else. Okay, let me comment on the video, and then I'll post it to Twitter. I can share this part. The video is titled Esports Talks Free Agency by Jay Silver. Okay, there's that. Let me put out on Twitter that I'm going live. Or that I'm live right now. Wait, why is this? This video is public, right? Yeah, so if it's public, why is that not? Huh. Ah, there we go. Apologize getting this one final thing out, and then we will watch, I promise. Reacting to the LCS, what is he calling it? LCS. on. There we go. A blast to fill. How did I enjoy that suite? Oh, dude, it's literally like watching Worlds all over again, and I hate it. I hate it. Except I'm not as invested in the Hopium, and I can just sit here and flame the shit out of the refs. Alright, let me make sure my thing posted. Okay. Did this properly post? I just need to make sure. Oh, it is nice having somebody else to blame, I must say. It is incredible. Yep, okay. That's good. Here we go. I don't know what order this is going to be. 2 hours? Holy shit. This is a long video.
Esports is a growing phenomenon in the last decade. Games like Overwatch, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and Dota 2 have drawn.
We get 360p. Unfortunately, the HD version is not available yet.
Oh well, it doesn't matter. As esports crown jewel.
So for context, let me pause. Jay is a writer. Or is a journalist. He was formerly with Newsweek, and then I forget the publication he's with now. Let me pull up. Sorry, yes, Insider. I mix up all of my... That is Jay in the chat, by the way. I mix up all my publications heavily, which mostly due to my own fault. But, ooh, let me post on Hive as well, just to make sure. React. Happy to be part of CS free agency this off season. Are on YouTube. Alright. We got 2 hours to go.
League of Legends has drawn millions of unique viewers, attracted a wide audience from content creators to even some world leaders, and have shaken up what the definition of a competitive sport can be. There are even players like Faker, who are often compared to global sports icons such as Michael Jordan. And like many competitive
Apologies
sports,
for any noise in the background. It's
change.
5 o'clock in New York City.
Some of the world's most iconic rosters have been changed after poor performance, or even some new opportunities. And League of Legends is no stranger to that. From super teams to rookie upstarts, the dynamic of League of Legends always changes. And that dynamic starts with free agency. My name is Jay Sobe. I'm a reporter who has been covering esports for the last 2.5 years. And as a reporter in this industry,
where's the next Pokemon going? I don't know. You tell me, Evie. You tell me.
And fresh life into the scene. With players and teams always looking to expand their horizon, it's no secret that free agency is always enthralling. But why does this happen? And who is ultimately involved? That's where we come in. Over the next hour and a half, I brought in some of my friends in backgrounds such as esports reporting, business.
Okay, I'm just sorry. I just wanted to make sure this is the sound of the video and not my Spotify going off.
It's not only a complex puzzle, but one that is more intricate than people may think. The free agency may be 24 hours away, but we're just getting started. Welcome to Esports Talk Free Agency, a discussion of the who and the what's of the LCS free agency.
Let's go.
Rather unique period of the LCS, we first need to understand why this period happens. And to do this, I'm pleased to welcome the king of wolf bombs himself, Jacob Wolf. Jacob is an award-winning investigative journalist who first started the free agency
I have
streams
to
4
agree.
years ago,
2020 was
as well
pretty
as working
elite.
for ESPN and Dot Esports. Now he's the founder and producer of Overcome, creator of the Jacob Wolf Report, and host of the Visionary
Alex,
podcast.
I'll link his Twitter
Jacob, thank you so
in the
much
video
for joining me this
or in
evening.
the
Thank you for
chat
having me
shortly.
today. I appreciate it.
So I think one of the things we need to understand is what exactly is free agency?
Yeah, so across the world, players are signing contracts to play on these professional League of Legends teams, and those contracts go to a certain amount of time depending on how long they are. So, I think the max contract now is 3 or 4 years is Riot's cap. They may have extended it
Which
some
is
longer.
so dumb.
My brain is mush for some of this, but
So
nonetheless,
dumb.
basically those contracts have to end at the end of the season, and the end of the season is the evening prior to this free agency open, and so free agency will end on Monday night prior to Thanksgiving, and will open Tuesday morning. So, and it's based around Greenwich Mean Time. So when the clock strikes 0 in the UK, it's a bonanza like across the world, and you see all of these players eligible now to sign new contracts with new teams. They're old
Which for the record is like I think
expiring,
6
and so
o'clock our
leading up into
time
the week to
tomorrow.
and this is why you see a lot of reporting beforehand. Agents are with permission negotiating contracts for these players with prospective new teams. Sometimes verbal agreements are reached, and then pen is put to paper on this day at that very specific hour. So that's what we built the show around originally, and that is sort of how everything works. This is the moment that players are able to start truly signing contracts and locking themselves into these teams.
Yeah, you mentioned the players and the teams, and you mentioned agents. So I'm kind of curious, who really is involved in this period?
Yeah, so this is a very busy period for esports professionals more broadly. You have leading up to this moment, and a lot of teams are lucky that they did not attend the World Championship, because then they can understand kind of what's going to happen the next season. They get like a couple months head start on planning. But the teams that did attend the League of Legends World Championship and do want to make changes, it's a 3-week sprint of working on everything involved. So planning a budget. How much money do we have to spend on our roster this year annually, right?
To be fair,
And
100
setting
Thieves
all of
more
that up. How
adversely
much can we
affected by
spend on
that
this
than most
position or
because
that
they're the ones
position,
making
right?
significant
A lot of teams
changes.
still very much adhere to
EG
that.
and
Not all
Cloud9 with
teams
minimal
do.
changes,
Liquid
they're
last
fine.
year, I think, was going to build a super team no matter what, and so they just signed the best available players and spent, I would guess, probably more than $5 million annually on salaries, which is a massive, crazy number that I would not expect to see again. Nonetheless, so you have
Until we sign Faker, by the way.
sort of finance people in these teams. You have general managers involved in these teams. You have attorneys that are usually not inside the teams themselves, but represent the teams outside of it. One that's very known is ESG Law, who represent most of the LCS, and some of the LEC as well. And they're working
for
on
those
this
that
stuff
don't know,
very
that is
busily
the
leading up
law
to it
firm
and preparing for this. And
created by
then you
Bryce
have
Blum.
On the other side of the table, you do have agents and the players themselves. And so most of the professional players in the LCS have agents at this point, or some sort of representation, being an attorney or whatever it may be.
So when a player enters free agency, what are usually their options?
Well, it depends. It's now it's gotten to a point where it's pretty much understood that teams are making decisions much more swiftly now. For the teams that do not make the World Championship, they will start making these decisions throughout August and September, and so players usually know no later than mid-October if they have a spot on their existing team or not.
You also
And
should
so
have a
they
gut
are
feeling
allowed
early
to.
on
That's why you
as
see
a player.
posts I'm still talking to XYZ, but I'm being given permission to talk to other teams. Reach out. Here's my email or my agent's email or whatever it may be. That's why you see a lot of that. And so from there, there's this period, this is where a lot of the reporting now comes from, is there's this period of their agents or the players talking to teams with permission from their previous teams. But it really is a sort of free for all. It's very confusing. We saw I believe Treats said yesterday or sorry, last week, that his contract is not being picked up at SK and that doesn't have a roster spot. Most of the LEC rosters are already determined. That used not to be the case a few years ago. I would say part of the reason
it doesn't suck.
rosters
I mean,
are
it sucks
determined
for
so
him,
much
but
in advance is because
your
I feel
agent
like
needs to
half
be
of
more
the
ears on the
leagues,
ground.
at least in the
in my eyes.
LCS and the LEC, half of the teams in the league don't spend a lot of money. and the other half of the teams do. And so like the best players usually figure out where they're going pretty quickly, and then it's just like budget teams from the other half. So I think that's really changed the reporting landscape.
Which, to
more
be fair, the
broadly and
definition of
changed
a
this
budget
period
team
of
is
time.
changing.
It
So
used to be where like you didn't know somebody was going where like until days after this opened. You know, I remember years ago, like Power of Evil was this player that was still like debated between a couple different teams, even days after free agency had opened the 3rd Tuesday in November. That doesn't happen as much anymore. I think it's
Power of Evil also notably not on a team for this split. I don't think he's been rumored to any
because,
academy
you know,
teams either.
people are making different choices about how they spend their money in League of Legends esports at the moment.
Right, and one person I want to give a credit to is LEC Wooloo. Brick has
Shout
had
out to the
a-
Wooloo.
pretty much a handle in the LEC and developed that roster very early. And I know you've worked with him at one point or another. But one of the other things that's interesting, at least within these last few years, is a 4-part kind of system where you have not only the LEC and the LCS, but also academy teams and in more particular regions, the ERLs for LEC. Do you think more players are starting to look at these different options, or are most of them trying to vie for that main spot?
Right before Jacob answers this question really quick, because I know there's 11 people in here, do me a favor. If you wouldn't mind going to the video
everybody.
itself on Jay Silver's YouTube channel and either like the video, subscribe to him, just comment to help boost the algorithm on that. Like me reacting here, by all means, like happy to do it and talk about it with you all, but it's best for him to make sure that you give some sort of interaction to his. Just make sure you go and support him in any way, whether as a retweet on Twitter, sharing the YouTube video itself, liking the YouTube video, something. Just go in and help out, because that's
Like,
what
tries
helps
to
these
vie
things
for a
get
main
pushed
spot.
into
Whether
the
or not
algorithm.
you get it is a different story. I do think that we have kind of two things that are happening simultaneously right now. You have a new crop of players who are coming up through those leagues that are now competitive for those main spots in the league. You know, think of people like Danny and Jojo Pyun, who were
Tenacity,
are,
Busio.
compared to their peers, young players in the LCS, right? Like they haven't been around for a long time compared to some of the veterans like Bjergsen or Double Lift, etc. And so when you have that cream of crop that is coming out of that and like basically vying for these top spots, they'll usually cost less money. And that's part of what I was talking about more broadly, is that there's this shift in spending, shift in how people are thinking about money right now, partly because there are bigger issues with money in esports right now. But
Yeah,
you know, I think that
slightly.
everyone wants a spot in an LCS team if they can get it, but it may be that they cost too much. It may be that they had a bad season and they need to sort of redeem themselves, or it may be that, you know, teams just think differently about them. They don't think that they're a good fit. So I think there's an excess of talent and a lack of money for some of the top players. And so I think you'll see some people who are teamless this year, like you did with someone like Jensen last year, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing that period. It was rather interesting to see some of these bigger names, and even this year we're going to have a wider
Hey, Angie.
variety. People
How's
like
it going, Josh?
Upset in the LEC not have a team for the split. It's always an interesting manner, and I guess a follow up to that.
See, Fanta, I agree with your point that JoJo is different than the others because he's able to build a brand. You are not ready for the fuckboy era of LCS that Tenacity is going to usher in. That's all I'm saying.
Like when this free agency period happens, and we kind of touched on it already, but what is the likelihood that people don't end up finding themselves on a team? Is it more high than it has been in the past?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think so. Again, because half of the teams are not spending a lot of money, and so you have the veteran players who have been around for a long time, and they've had these bigger salaries. They've been worth them. They've demanded them. And
Don't worry, Angie.
that's just not
We're
the
watching
case.
the
Like, there
entire
aren't 10
thing.
teams in both leagues, or 10 teams in each league, spending like they have in previous years, and so it really does come back to that. I do think it is more likely that veteran players won't find teams this year, just simply for the fact that
Assuming they're asking a
simply for the
lot.
fact that there's just not as much money to go around. You know, like I think about some of the teams involved this year and who I've heard about sort of spending big, and it sounds like, you know, 100 Thieves is willing to spend big. It seems like Team Liquid's kind of somewhere in the middle. FlyQuest is willing to spend big because they just got a new cash infusion with a new owner, and they've hired Papa Smithy to go figure out this new roster and given him a bigger budget than in past years when they were running on a smaller budget, even though they were competitive some years with a smaller budget. And I think about those teams, but then there are a lot of these other teams, Dignitas, etc., who just kind of spend the minimum, and they're okay with that, or spend like not the minimum literally, but you know what I mean. They spend sort of what they can to field a roster that is somewhat competitive. And then there are some teams in the middle, places like CLG and others.
Sledge,
Like,
just
they'll
go
spend
find
enough,
his
but they won't develop
TikTok or
talent,
Twitter
like,
and
based
just start
off
going
the
through the
background
likes.
of the people
That's all
that
you
are
have to
working
do.
there. And they've proved that they can do that, I think. So it's not like it was in 2017 or 2018 and 2019 where the LCS and the LEC franchised and everybody was spending a ton of money on these rosters. That's not happening anymore.
Yeah, gone are the days of the giant super teams like we saw in 2018 with the Team Liquid, Double Lift, Impact, Jensen acquisition. Those days are gonna be long gone for a while. I also know
I don't
that
know.
you are an avid sports.
Depends
fan
on your
yourself.
definition.
I always see you commenting on Twitter about sports. Are there any similarities between traditional free agency?
Josh,
and
this was
sports
filmed
and esports.
like I filmed my segment
Yes,
of this.
I mean,
on
the roster open
Let me
period
pause this.
is taken.
I filmed my segment on this 2 days ago, so it was not filmed too early. There's certain you gotta realize when talking about all this stuff, there are certain things that you have to keep in mind that aren't publicly announced yet, that aren't talked about. Certain things are reported, but they're not confirmed. Like how things are, like unless something is 100% stated by an organization, you can't use that as like a reliable basis.
And from traditional sports and its core. The idea that we had for the original free agency show at ESPN 3 years ago,
The
was
4-hour-long
from traditional- or 4
director's
years
cut.
ago, was from
Hell
traditional
yes.
sports. It's something that we went and talked to producers who had worked on like the Jump trade deadline show, which is the basketball trade deadline show, and we got their advice
Exactly.
and
They
picked their
can't even
brains
say
on, like,
anything.
what
So
we
you have
could
to be
be
careful
doing.
with how you
Somebody
talk
that
about it
knows
and how you
people
present it
building
because
the
it can
show from the
affect
ground
players
up.
and orgs.
And so, yeah, there is a lot of similarities between the two. But I think that, League of Legends is very unique in its own sense. I think a lot of people need the perspective that esports is still very young and nascent. And so while
I'm not sure how to go about responding to comments or like the chat section of this because we do have 2 hours to get through of this, which by all means we have more than enough time to. But I think let's address now the comment of veterans aren't getting rosters and orgs aren't spending. Just because Doublelift and Bjergsen are on a team does not mean that organization is spending. The reason why some names are gonna get positions and others aren't is because the names that get spots are willing to take the pay cut. There are others that are going to hold out. For example, if PoE is still maintaining a high salary expectation, then understandably nobody's going to pick him up. If PoE drops his salary expectations and communicated to the market by a significant amount to the point where he is very cheap and you know the quality that you're getting, then he will be picked up. It's all about the combination of the price you set for yourself and the demand of the market. And most pros that don't have teams, either A, are probably dealing with overpricing themselves in the market, or B, I mean, I hate to say it, but like at some point your goods have run their term. I don't believe that to be the case with Whippo, where I feel like any team would take him for the right price. But something tells me he wasn't willing to drop it that low. That's just gut feeling. I can't imagine any team like, I don't know, Golden Guardians not taking him if he's for a reasonable amount for their budget.
to look like traditional sports sometimes, the money and the way that things work are just not the same yet. And so, we're still in the very early days, I think, of what esports is to be.
Are there any differences between the two?
The biggest difference to me is the professionalism around it. Poaching is a very serious offense in the NBA. It does happen, but it's very infrequent that players are sort of working together to get certain teams. We've seen it more and more frequently.
Exactly. Until we
especially
know the
since
leaks, we
Miami
won't
Heat
know
team
anything.
with LeBron James and Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade in the early 2010s. But I think that now in esports, the amount of tampering and poaching that happens in any given year that like Riot just doesn't do anything about, it's pretty severe, and it's gotten worse with
Really?
some agents in particular who don't care about those rules. And so yeah, it's just not like the enforcement around it and sort of the professionalism around it are not the same.
I do want to ask about something we talked about in the beginning of our conversation. We talked about people not understanding what the free agency is, and I want to know, as someone who's been reporting it but also diving into some of these deeper issues, what's something that you know about the free agency period that a lot of people genuinely don't
A
understand?
lot is the right answer.
Yeah, I don't think they understand a lot of the mechanics of how it works, frankly. Like, I think that, when they, and I'm not taking credit away from him, I've repeatedly tried to give good credit where good credit is due to Woo.
Very big red
but
flag.
when Woo-Woo's like reporting that a player will join a team, those contracts aren't done. Like, I have seen situations, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it used to, where like a player would agree to do something, and then had to wait 3 weeks to sign a contract, and then in the 3-week period something would blow up. And it's part of the reason I've always been really reserved in reporting in my career is I have a good record of doing this, because I've always tried to be very good about not speaking too soon. I want assurances that things are going to work out. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They just think like, oh, players joined this team and it's done. It's a done deal. And it's like, actually, none of it's done until that.
I feel like
that
most
third
people that are
Tuesday of every single
ingrained
November hits, and
within
people actually
esports
start putting
understand
their
that
pens to
now,
paper
at
and
least.
signing these contracts. That's the moment that everything becomes real. And again, it doesn't happen as much anymore as it used to, but there used to be times like back in 2015, 2016 where players would blow up deals.
No, to comment on that, because I know Jacob and Travis aren't the biggest fans of each other when it comes to how off-season is reported and how all this is handled. There is something to be said about like the projections that Travis makes. While they are amazing to react to as a fan and as somebody externally, it does tip off the conversation to the public and can affect negotiations in some capacity, which you can debate who that benefits more, like whether that's the player, the team, etc. But there's, as much as I do enjoy those videos that Travis puts out, putting anything out there that says like 50% confident on this is like, eh. And that's why at World specifically, I was like, do not tell me shit. I don't want to know rumors. I don't want to know anything else. I don't want to have a say. I want to be able to react to this in the same way that I react in the same way that everybody else does. Because then there's no pressure on me at all. I don't want that.
And I remember being in like a very
agents play a shady game. If you've ever watched Entourage, you know exactly how the game works.
Piglet and what became Team Liquid, etc. And like, yeah, just a lot of like weird juggling. I don't know. It's
exactly.
that I think a lot of
teams
people
and players will both try
learn
and
more
game
about
the
mechanics.
resources and system available to them to the best of their ability.
Understood. I do want to jump back one more time a little bit. Something we didn't touch on, which I do think is important, is the word contract. We've thrown around contract so many times, and we're not referring to the player here. We're referring to the actual contract itself. What goes into a contract? Is it, since a lot of people may not understand the text that is in the contract, they just see the flashing social media posts.
Yeah, every contract's a little different, but I would say, I mentioned ESG law earlier. ESG has sort of a template contract that they use for a lot of the teams, It's funny when I see a player contract, I can tell that it's their work based on the way it's worded, because I recognize sort of the legalese, the lawyer language used in them, and so a contract basically outlines compensation. It has a term, right? How long does it last? How long is this player on this team? That's what you see reflected in the global contract database, right? When they end, it covers sort of any other additional performance needs other than actually playing on the team. So, if a player has a certain amount of streaming hours, or
I always assume that people have a higher base understanding of contracts than they actually
right? They
do.
have to appear at these sponsorship events throughout the year, or
I
appear
assume
in
that everybody took
content.
their business
Covers
law
any of
class,
that
but
stuff that happens throughout the year, like all of that's legally set in stone. It covers what a buyout would be, usually, not always. There are fixed buyouts and there are not fixed buyouts. So fixed buyouts are set. They're usually X amount of the player's salary or compensation. For because teams want to make their money back if they're letting go of a player early, and then it covers sort of any benefits associated, right? Just like any standard other employment contract,
Healthcare,
retirement
401k.
retirement 401k, healthcare, any of that that a player needs to deal with. And then it also covers termination. So, like, if a player wants to terminate early, that usually comes with them forfeiting money.
I was gonna say they're not employed at will, so
Or
termination
if
has to be
a
specifically.
team wants to terminate early, they're usually quite team favorite. That a team can cut the contract early. A lot of agents have been fighting, player agents have been fighting to make the termination period longer and the pay longer. So if a player gets cut early, say they're 1 year into a 3-year contract, you can't just like terminate that person and leave them on their ass. You have to give them a certain amount of notice, and you have to pay them a certain amount of money.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so
Which
it covers
would
kind of all
really
those things. And then just
be a
like
lot
the
easier to
usual,
pass if we had a fucking players
what is a breach of
association. But
contract? How is a breach of contract mended? Sort of just
I guess
more
that's never
boring
gonna
legal
happen.
stuff. But
like
really,
a formal,
those
like
points I
actual
made earlier are
legal
the big
players,
parts, big
players
key parts
union,
of
not
player contracts.
the player
And my final
council
question
thing
for
that
you
currently
is,
exists.
as someone who's been doing this for a while, what should people expect to see on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think that
The confirmation of
Europe
everything we know.
Maybe a little bit different than this, but at least in America and the LCS, I do think you'll be surprised by how few teams are investing in the biggest players. I have no doubt we've seen reporting that like Double Lift and Bjergsen and Spica are like out there trying to shop themselves as a package to certain teams. I believe that to be true. I would be surprised if they don't find a home. Somebody will do it, but we won't see as many sort of big spin, big swing teams as we have in past seasons. We're in a really tough time right now for esports where, a lot of people made a lot of investor promises in 2016 and 2017 and 2018 about how much money they were going to make in 5 years. Almost none of those have come true.
Yeah.
The ecosystem for esports is in a bad place fiscally. The economy.
The ecosystem. I was about to say the ecosystem for everything's in a bad place right now.
The entire world is sort of headed towards a recession, and so
We're there, my friend. Just not formally, but we're there.
Raising venture capital right now is really tough, especially if you're a business like an esports team who's been around for a long time and they're unable to, raise more money because the valuations are so crazy, and so. Yeah, a lot of teams are being a lot more hyper conservative with their money. So,
to apply this to the real world right now, there are so many people in. For context, I work in finance. For those that don't know, the amount of companies that are not giving proper raises to keep up with inflation is ridiculous. And then all the employees leave and go elsewhere because everybody's still hiring, because there's not enough people working still to replace the baby boomers that are retiring and just the general need for workers in the workforce. So you just end up leaving your company and go somewhere else that's going to pay you the actual amount that your company should have been paying you in the first place. And it's just a vicious cycle that just keeps going and going. I read a few years ago that the average person changes jobs 6 times before they find their like one job that they're with forever. That number's going to skyrocket for our generation. I'm at 4 now, and I'm 28. And like the volatility of the market just makes it so scary all the time.
Don't be surprised if you see LCS teams that are confusing, that have a lot of young players on them who don't make as much money as the veterans. And if you see a lot of veteran players who don't have jobs, that's sort of my expectation for next week.
Yeah.
Jacob, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Team dynamics.
One of the crucial parts of any esports organization is the team behind it. Free agency often shows the parts of the teams coming together, whether it be one day or an entire month. But one of the things that is important is
I know, I could
why
tell.
these parts work.
Fuck
to
you.
do this, I brought in some of my friends who are experts in team analysis. Carver Fish. Carver got his start as an LPL expert and now writes about all things league at Dexerto. And Kari is an esports flex commentator, host, pundit, and kindred lover who has appeared
Space Ghost
on LCS, North American Academy, and much more. Carver and Kari, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, happy to be here. So excited to finally
Hey,
talk
Carver.
about League of Legends.
I got an interesting question for you
That's
guys.
gotta
to
be,
start
that
off
had to
our
have been
panel.
complicated, Jay,
It may
going
sound a
between
little bit
Carver
of common
Kari and just like
sense,
mixing
but I
up
kind
the
of
two
want to know
names.
from you guys, what actually does an LCS team compose of?
Yeah, so in comparison to the early days of esports, there are a lot of moving parts with teams, and it really varies depending on the team, right? Like some teams have behavioral coaches and people that help maintain the health of their players, but realistically, you have your 5 main roles, subs wherever possible, and then an entire academy team that you can pull from as well, or I guess NACL now. You have a coach, which the role of a coach varies a lot depending on the team. You'll see a lot of people blame things on the coach when in reality every team kind of operates different. There's a very different dynamic between,
To be
some
fair, that
teams
exists in
have
every single
a
sport,
support that is really
regardless
vocal and
of
likes to
whether
direct
it's league or
things, whereas
basketball
some
or
teams will have like a really
etc.
quiet support, for example, right? So a lot of these teams have that same core, but what's around it is very different depending on budget, depending on the dynamic between the players on the team, and also depending on how well the team's actually doing. Because if most teams that don't do well don't have as much budget to invest in things like having like a really nice esports facility to practice in, which can really help improve the quality of players
With the exception of Team Liquid in 2020 spring.
that they have in their
Just
organization.
throwing that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to that, there's also like levels of coaches as well. We've seen the rise of positional coaches, especially in this last year. Golden Guardians kind of led the charge on that one, and we saw other organizations follow suit. But now, hilariously, Golden Guardians is actually trimming their positional staff. So
Okay, hold up. Let me pop off about this real quick. I still believe to this day that positional coaches were just a way for organizations to keep veteran players who couldn't play anymore around in the scene in some capacity because they felt bad about them losing jobs. I'm sorry, but every team does not need a positional coach for mid. There's no way that somebody watching film is going to, like, there's only so much value add there, and there's no way it's for the salary of whatever they were being given. There's no way. Positional coaches might make sense at like some very, very high level teams, but there's no scenario where every single team needs them, especially some of the bottom of the barrel teams at all.
whether or not there's a lot of efficacy there remains to be determined.
And you guys mentioned both times scouting for players, whether it be coming from academy. Some players we've even seen come
Like
up from
that
solo
should be the first thing to go.
I mean, I know those are two examples, but there are dozens of other examples.
They might have useful
Where do
insight, but you should
people
already have somebody on
usually,
staff that can
when
do
they're
that
scouting
for you.
teams, where do they go to get this talent?
As far as talent scouting goes, I can speak to North America and a little bit of LEC, but for the most part, solo queue is the Wild West, and we don't necessarily pull unpolished players from there a lot of the time. Sometimes it can happen, and sometimes you can sort of polish that player to learn about a team dynamic. But a lot of the times, these players will end up paying their dues in either amateur, academy. Sometimes they will be in academy and they'll have been subbing for years.
Completely agree,
before they ever
Panta.
get
If
their
they were
shot at the
contractors,
LCS
then
stage.
great, but
one thing remains really important.
I don't think they
is
are.
that these players who are on these teams, first and foremost, have a sense of what a team dynamic is like, and that's not always the case in solo queue. It's a very self-reliant thing. So pulling players out of solo queue, sometimes you have to undo the damage that solo queue can do to your brain. But yeah, I'm sure Carver has some other additional thoughts here as well.
Where do we get players from? Other countries? No.
Well, that is one way to put it.
No.
But true.
Okay, so a lot of the time, big talent that comes into the LCS does actually come from other countries, but more specifically challengers leagues from Korea. You'll see a lot of the players that come into the LCS and do really well. For instance, Berserker was in T1's Challenger League team.
Yep. I think we just picked up another one of T1's Challenger players.
FlyQuest's UG was like playing in Korean solo queue on like 200 ping from country far away. I believe it was Mongolia.
Why would you ever do
but
that?
it's finding talent is really difficult because, especially in North American solo queue, there are a lot of one tricks. There are a lot of people that have like have cemented their play style, and
Yeah, I
especially a
know.
lot of content creators over here that, oh, I'm a Shaco player. Well, that's not going to work in pro play. So how do you translate that? How do you translate someone that is rank 1 in solo queue into a pro player and unlearn, like Kari mentioned, unlearn those really bad habits that do well in solo queue and very poorly in pro play? We even see players get into the LCS that haven't unlearned that kind of stuff, that have gotten by in the academy from having a really high level of skill. Immortals Kenvi comes to mind, someone who destroyed an academy, went to LCS and got stomped. And it's...
To be fair, I heard, now this is one of the few things that I heard in the offseason. That was not as much of a result of his champion pool and issues converting from solo queue. It was purely stage fright, which is something that we don't talk about a lot in esports, because you're throwing 18-year-old kids onto the stage that are 9 times out of 10 socially a little bit awkward, and they don't have the infrastructure growing up like traditional sports do, where, you know, if you're good at soccer, if you're good at football or basketball, you're playing in these development leagues from the time you're 8 years old and on, and you get proper coaching, you get a sense of this bigger stage. If you're good enough as a freshman in high school at 13, 14 years old, you're starting on the varsity team, and you're playing in front of crowds, so you can get used to it early. Whereas here, you just throw people in front of a crowd of 300 people, all of a sudden, it's like, oh shit, this is a little bit different.
tough.
We do not talk about that
because,
enough.
You know, you need like a good coach and a good staff around that player to find their full potential and get them to where they're crushing the LCS the same way they were in the Challengers League, because they're missing like something fundamental, something that needs to be taught. Finding talent is really hard, especially in North America's current landscape, where people are kind of down in the LCS. Solo queue is hard. Queue times are really
Yeah,
long.
we know.
It's difficult.
Game quality's terrible.
The other thing that's interesting too is queue times for Challenger solo queue in Korea are like 2 to 3 minutes. In North America, they're like 20. So what ends up happening is there are people who have to sit in queue, and they're just players in North America spend so much more time staring at a queue timer, and it makes it really difficult for people here to be motivated, which is why we pull a lot of talent from other countries that have a more cultivated high elo environment. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Oh, that was great.
You also
That
just
was
need
so
to grow the
so,
damn game to
in-depth
solve
too.
that
I have
problem.
something to add to that too is that I was watching Ose. I like Pabu. He was on Pentanet
Mhm.
formerly,
Mhm.
and it took him 4 hours to get a pop.
Oh my
so
god.
Ose challengers. I know, the deep breath. It's pretty intimidating. The quality is not there. That sucks.
Mhm.
No.
I think one thing I do want to kind of talk about a little bit, and we'll come back to this. You mentioned this one trick. I think of one actually very key example was DRX's Pioshek,
Yep.
who was a Kindred one trick,
Yep.
and now is a world champion. But we do see some of these one tricks do make their way.
One tricks
into
get a
solo
lot of
queue
shit,
and
sometimes
onto
for
these
no
academy
reason.
amateur teams. People like General Sniper from 100 Thieves Nets
Yep.
is a big example of upcoming talent that was pulled from the solo queue ladder. If he were to become a player, he would technically classify as a rookie. And one of the things that's often
next
really,
year. He can't slot in until next year when he's of
what's
age.
the word I'm looking for? Really exemplified in League of Legends is veteran versus rookie talent. I'll give rookie to Kari. I'll give veteran to Carver. Would you guys be able to classify what the difference is between these two terminologies, especially in League of Legends?
Yeah, rookie terminology, it does vary by region. I'll just use the LCS since that's the closest example that I have. For example, well, I'll just say in LCK, and correct me if I'm wrong, but rookies have a very well-defined rookie period. Whereas in the LCS, you could be playing in the LCS Academy for 4 years and never have received any accolades. And I think in the LCS, it's about the accolades. So if you've never received Rookie of the Year, or you've never received MVP of the Split, or any of those other accolades, you're still considered technically a rookie. And I do believe
That's a
that
North
it's
American
pretty
thing
much
as a whole,
contingent on accolades.
not just League.
But it also is contingent on how much time you've spent on the LCS.
Who are the
main
all-American
stage.
players in
So
basketball
we
and
sort of go rookies by,
football?
you know,
Like
1,
that's
2, sometimes 3 years. If they go further than that, then they generally, you know, a lot of those players end up falling off because they don't make it to LCS. So rookies don't always have survivability, but the ones that do, generally, it comes down to accolades is what stops you from being a rookie, basically.
Yeah, it's tough because there's a select few players that have been kind of stuck in the academy system. It feels like Darshan comes to mind.
Forever. Yeah,
Guy
forever.
is cracked. Darshan is probably better
I
than
agree.
most of the LCS top laners we have right now, and he's stuck. And
Yeah.
he's I believe he's a free agent right now, or at least his contract with Cloud9 is expiring, and he's allowed to explore new things.
can't say I agree on that one.
Man, it's tough because it takes a long time to become a veteran, and the reality of esports is players who have put so much time into this one thing, it's very difficult to see a path after that. So once you're a veteran, your priorities kind of shift. And it goes from I want to win to I want to be able to live and, you know, be able to make this career that I built for myself last for the rest of my life. How do I do that?
Yep.
You know, Vulcan's tweet thread kind of blew up. I'm not going to get too into that, but there is a certain culture among veterans where you have an upside, where they know a lot about the game. They've been around for a long time. They're proven talent. They're very good at what they do.
And arguably
But it's- on the
overvalue
other hand, it's very
yourself
difficult for
every
them to
time in the
justify
market.
taking risks and doing things that would, you know, make investors or coaches angry, where they want to try this pick, but if they lose that pick, people are going to flame them. It doesn't matter if the people that flame them have no idea what they were going for and haven't seen scrims. It still doesn't look good for the team. So in a way, teams can benefit from having a rookie that really wants to prove themselves, because it feels like that can sort of give people hunger and the willingness and motivation to compete at a very high level.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, by the way. Sorry to interrupt, Jay.
Yeah, he was.
It's always like the back and forth, but rookies are like the puppies that like invigorate the older dogs. They like want to play, and then you have like, so that's like Danny and JoJo Pew, and like running at the feet of Vulcan is it inspires him to become a better shot caller, a better leader. So that dynamic is really like kind of adorable.
He did, yeah.
I think a good example of this also, maybe somewhere in the middle ground, is the CLG roster that just happened in summer of 22, where players like Contracts, Dokla, who at one point were rookies in their own right, ended up having a 1 or 2 rough splits, sent to the academy leagues, and then were able to prove themselves in a different manner. So that's kind of like the middle ground, where they're not exactly rookies, but they're not quite veteran talent as well.
Great counterpoint.
And again, kind of what Kari just said, they need to prove themselves a little bit. We did talk about this.
This makes me wonder. I would love to know. I would love to know from a market standpoint, how much is Darshan asking for a starting spot on the LCS? I find it hard to believe if he said to every team out there, yeah, I'm willing to start for 75K, that he wouldn't have a job. There's no way. There's no way he wouldn't have a job for 75K.
Quite a bit, whether it be shot calling or just other traits. What are some traits that teams look for in an individual player?
All right.
No, you can't live on 75K, but that's not... The point is, it does, like, when you're negotiating these contracts, what you can live on is irrelevant to your status in the market. And it sucks. Like, it by all means, I get that. And to be fair, if I can live in New York City as an individual on 60-some K, yeah, I find it hard to believe that they couldn't live on 70K with roommates and figuring everything else out, given that most teams help with housing. And even if they don't, you literally split an apartment with 2 or 3 roommates. You can make it work. I'm not saying it's comfortable at all. And you need to be working on supplemental sources of revenue to make sure that you have other money to spend. But point being, you are at the beholdens of the market.
I'll keep it brief, hopefully. One of the things that, I mean, there's always like this.
And see, then you blame
debate
Cloud9.
about, you know, how can NA get better? How can NA get
If
better?
Darshan got released
And
very
a lot of
late,
people are
then
like,
yeah.
More hours, which sure, maybe, but I think the other
Did he
thing
not-
is the attitude and mindset of our.
Nah, see, that's bull. I know you're an LA native, but you can live on 75K. If you can live in New York on 75K, you can live in LA on 75K. I refuse to believe otherwise. I'm not saying life is comfortable. Let's make a very clear distinction there. Like, life sucks if you're doing it, but it is doable, is the point. But again, it's debate. That's kind of we're going down a rabbit hole for no reason.
Our team and players, and I think that that's been changing a lot. I mean, the way that Evil Geniuses scouts.
I mean, I
from what
agree,
we
but
can
the
tell,
market's
has a lot
never
to
in
do
your
with
favor as to
willingness-
what you're actually
willingness to
worth.
learn and
Very
attitude.
rarely.
It's not necessarily picking up the most flashy. I mean, Jojo Pyun and Danny are
It's
the
all a
most flashy
game
of
at
the
the end
year
of the day.
players, I would say, but they don't always go for the most mechanically gifted players, but rather the ones that can be shaped into those mechanically and team-based gifted players. I think one of the most important things is that team mindset, because you can, all it takes is one like top laner with a bad attitude that can make the entire team's flow just fall apart. So that willingness to actually be a part of a team and actually be melded
Exactly.
is starting to become a priority in NA, where it used to be like, you know, he flames people on Twitter and he's got a lot to say, he's a hot shot, but he's real talented. But we started to realize that those big hot shots aren't always effective teammates.
Yeah, so it's interesting that Kari mentions that. Actually, I grabbed an interview that I had with Oto Omne, who, yes, isn't in North America, but I did ask him about, you know, what it takes to develop a super team. And man, this has been the
I tried to
year of
convince
collapse.
Odo at the Red Bull
Every
party in New
single
York
thing that
City to
anybody's
come to
ever put
North
together,
America.
it is
It didn't
proven
work clearly,
over
but I at least
everything
put a
else,
word in
even
for
up to
us.
the finals where DRX wins against T1 with the power of friendship.
An
Okay.
anime.
In anime.
And Genshin Impact.
And definitely Genshin
Bear
Impact.
spending 30 grand on Genshin Impact. Yeah, it's proven more than anything else that having a team that works well together will just be so much better for you than getting together a team that is individually very good at what they do. And having a team that
No,
gets
I
along.
haven't heard
So I'm
anything
gonna
about
use a very
Abadage. I have
asinine
no
example
clue.
here. This is taking things real basic.
I'm
So
excited.
imagine you're in the team facility. You left some leftovers in the fridge, and your jungler ate your leftovers. Now, yes, these are pro players, but how do we know that before a game, someone's jungler didn't eat somebody's leftovers? Maybe they don't trust them as much to gank their lane. I know that sounds so stupid, but the reality is that the LCS is filled with people that are in their late teens and early
Panta,
20s,
Ava had a
who have
very
not really
clear
been in
case of
professional
stage
environments
nerves.
before. And I
Like,
think when
very
teams are
clear.
trying to
If you
scout,
look at how he
that it's
performed
really
on the
good to look
LCS
for
stage,
in-game leaders and out of
in
game
LA
leaders
versus
who create
any
a
time he played on a
really
main
good
stage,
team
whether that was
environment
Chicago,
that can grow.
whether that
And
was
not
where we had in
have,
Spring
you know,
Houston or
because
Worlds,
yes, that
night
sounds
and
like
day
a really
difference.
dumb thing. It sounds so
And
small.
that's,
Someone's
the
supposed to
second you
sell
see
these
that, there's
leftovers.
nothing you can do.
If something like that happens,
No matter
over
how
and over
good
again
you
between
are, if you know
players
that
in a
somebody's going to
form
collapse the
between
second you get
players,
to
you can have
international
teams
play,
collapse based on things that aren't even in the game.
it
Maybe
just
in
is
theory
what
they
it
work well
is. It
together, but in
sucks,
practice they don't.
but
And it's an impossible job. Like, there is no perfect team. It's never going to happen. But
it's because we don't go for
what people can
perfection.
do
We
is
go
just
for
try their best to
entertainment.
scout players that have somewhat similar play styles. For instance, if you have a carry top laner, you want that
How's
person
it
to be able to
going,
play
Noomy?
carries. So you need a jungler that can work with the top laner well, play either junglers that are good in the early game or that are really strong for initiating fights, right? Because you don't have that top lane frontliner. So when you're building a team, if you have the best carry jungler and the best carry top laner in the region paired, it's probably not going to go very well. So not only do you have to think about players' personalities, which, I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge that off the rip, but also you have to think about how well they play together, and whether or not their play styles are even compatible in the first place.
Carver, we all know you're talking about Santorin. It's the plug-and-play jungler. That guy is such a good team player. Like,
Which
he has
used to
no
be
interest
Smithy's
at all-
role.
Well, maybe a little interest in the glory, but it's
Yeah.
those team players that are really important. Like, just as important as like main character Bjergsen, for
There we go.
example, or Danny. Well, actually, Danny played weak side, but even still, main character Jojo Pyun. Even still, having people who are selfless and think about how to get the team ahead as opposed to themselves, absolutely irreplaceable. Such a good point, Carver. Such a good point.
And Jay, we'll move on real quick, but just an example. So we talked about Pioshik a bit, and I think it's the greatest example recently that we could ever talk about, where you could see they were hovering his Kindred, his one trick, his signature champion, and he gave it up to play tanks if those games could have gone very differently if Pioshik decided to pick his character that he wanted. Like that is a very clear and visual, like this is someone humbling themselves and playing for the team and prioritizing his teammates over himself. And that's the kind of thing that really, creates teams that can get titles.
Probably one of the most interesting examples to this was last year's C9 with Summit. We love Summit as a top laner, but I think there was a lot of criticism over the team's
and he's back
to play around him. And this kind of does remind me of the debate between domestic and foreign talent. Kari, my question to you is, as someone who covers more of that domestic leagues, like the amateur academy scenes, how do we know?
If there's a dog episode of Name Men, let me know, and I'll bring Coco and Luna on.
Or is it just a shot in the dark, essentially?
Unfortunately, getting a starting spot in the LCS is so difficult that there is no way to know when the time will come. Knowing when a player is ready, I feel like staff players, I feel like everybody knows when they are ready. I feel like King, for example, last year, who was subbing in on Cloud9, was not ready. He was extremely nervous on stage.
No, he was not.
His hands shaking. And if maybe he had had more practice on stage, unfortunately, COVID took that away from him. But nobody, even his own staff, didn't necessarily they were telling the fans, be gentle with him. It's his first time on the LCS stage.
Gotta
whereas,
love
for
the
example,
mid-segment
Cory,
updates.
who came in and subbed for Danny in Evil Geniuses, they were all like, he's good, he's got it, we know he's ready for the stage, we know we've prepared him adequately. So whether you're ready or not, if one of those main slots goes down, if you're an academy, you are going on stage no matter what. So I think staff and everybody knows when they're ready, but sometimes it can't be helped.
And Carver, as someone who's covered the LPL, I know you kind of tend to look for some of those diamonds in the rough players who may not have gotten their shot in a higher team in the LPL or LCK, but then come to North America and surprisingly do well. I think of someone like a Berserker, for example. When is it appropriate for a team to possibly consider going outside the North American talent pool? Is it a budget thing, or is it, hey, we really think this player would suit well in our environment? Someone like an Inspired, for example, coming from the LEC.
You have to really be on.
The answer is yes.
The way that they play. When you're bringing in a pro from another region, especially if they don't have the best English going in and have to learn on the fly. Now, full credit to Berserker. He's ready to do full interviews in English. That guy is cracked. But not everybody's that fast with language, and that's okay. So I'll use an example. I think OMG Sean G is one of the best top players in the world. That guy's crazy. Love him. If you were to put him on a team in North America, you would have to play around him. If you didn't play around him properly, you would have a very similar situation to something like Summit.
Yep.
A lot of things have to go right. You have to have a player that's down to live in North America and down to eat different food and operate on different hours and be away from their family and friends to do this new thing. And not everybody's going to be down for that. Some pros come over here and leave, maybe partially because of performance, but also because they just weren't happy with living here. It's a culture shock.
If you're not willing to accept the culture shock, I don't know what to tell you.
When you don't import to fill holes on a team, you import to build one, and you get players around that strong import talent that can fill the holes that maybe. Really hard.
100 Thieves kind of proved that wrong, where they built the good core and then filled in Abadage.
Okay, we have this really good AUC. Let's get someone that can play Tom Kench support, that can keep them alive, that can support a carry playstyle, rather than.
Perks can cite family reasons, but at the end of the day, we all know very damn well he was only over here because he couldn't get onto Fnatic.
And then fill holes, not the other way around.
One quick question for you guys before we wrap up our segment here. When we're looking at these teams going into this particular offseason, I know I talked to Jacob Wolf earlier in our show, and he mentioned that there may be some roster things that are going on, with budgets especially. But at the same time, we know North America, someone's going to be surprising somewhere. So I want to give each of you a minute just to kind of think, if you guys have to look at some team examples, what do you think one of the most important things that are going to be looked at for teams heading into 2023?
Going into 2023,
hang on, I want to answer this myself before She goes on. Wait, I just realized that I am. What was I doing there? That was randomly going out. One of the things to consider, in my opinion, is the 100 Thieves philosophy that John Robinson stated, which I think is like really important. But Golden Guardians has talked about it, and it's a philosophy in sports where you're building around these of opportunity to win it all. Your thought has to be to win the LCS. You don't care about Worlds. If Worlds success comes, then great. But you are playing to win the LCS, and that comes with building around a combination of younger and older players. And you need those younger players to peak at the right time where you can slot a few things in, and then everything works. And it's a system that takes years to develop and years to get to, of mixing and matching the right pieces and doing proper scouting to make sure that the fundamentals that you're building on are good. I don't know how to say it without just praising the shit out of 100 Thieves, but alas, here we are.
Geniuses presented their final proof of concept after about 3 years of working at it and insisting that they would eventually have something to show for it. This year, they really, truly, and genuinely did. And I think that proof of concept proves that coaching staff is essential. And with Evil Geniuses emptying out their coaching coffers, retaining Kelsey Moser, which is an incredible pickup for them, as like sort of the base for their coaching staff. I think that's going to be huge, especially, and I mean this in the most non-flamey way. The failure of Quixoto to mesh with the team at Team Liquid is obviously going to give them some.
You can say that the most non-flamey way, but my friend, that is flamey,
right,
and I wholeheartedly agree.
Cloud9 had an emphasis with LS coming in that early time. It didn't work because he wasn't like compatible with Jack's processes. He wants meetings every single morning, for example. So I think more than ever, coaching staff is going to come in clutch this year. I think that's going
always
to be
has,
extremely
always
important.
will, at least in league.
100%. And especially seeing as much as it kind of sucks that Golden Guardians have outed positional coaches, they do have a brand new facility. Like Golden Guardians is a team to watch for me for sure. I'm really excited to see what happens with them.
2023 is their year for sure.
No, it is not. No, the fuck it is not.
Genuinely though.
FlyQuest, yes. Golden Guardians, no.
Yes, people aren't paying as much for players, but that is across the board. So budget has gone down for everybody, which is kind of unfortunate to admit, but that doesn't mean that it can't bounce back.
It's not unfortunate. It should have happened.
That players that were previously expensive are still expensive, but not nearly as much. So I don't think
it scales down
budget
as it
cuts
should.
will impact the region as much as people think, because everybody's scaling back pros that were worth $2 million or worth $1 million.
Yeah, but that $1 million makes a massive difference.
I do think it's difficult to say what's going to happen because the LCS is kind of behind the off-season roster apocalypse shuffle that the LEC has had already. So we don't really know a lot of the teams yet. I do hope that when we see the teams that they'll be a little bit more formed around creating synergy, creating a play style, creating something that we can look at most teams in the LCS and have like a firm grasp of their play style and their identity, because I don't feel like we can really do that with many teams from last split. Where you can look at a team and pick out their playstyle. Team Liquid's a great example because it's really difficult to look at Team Liquid from the last.
Yeah, they kept saying they're gonna stick to this playstyle and then changing it over and over and over.
Their win condition was the team. And if you go into a game with no idea how you're going to win, it's probably not going to go great.
Yeah, and that's where the coach comes in. He's supposed to have the big picture because, as we all know, players are obsessed with their role, obsessed with their lane, and it's the coach's job to pull the bigger picture out of all of his teammates.
They are the glue that brings everybody
together. So I think Carver and I unanimously agree that we will see the players that we know and love, but maybe a little more controlled this time.
Yep. Hopefully.
All right, with that, that's all the questions that I have for you for this segment. Carver and Kari, thank you so much, and I loved hearing your insight about the team dynamic.
It's been a pleasure. This has been so fun.
For putting this on, I appreciate it.
As we all know, esports is not only an industry of entertainment, but also one of business and entrepreneurship.
Oh.
Insurance companies, food and drink brands, and even some NBA teams have partnered with the LCS top brands.
I wonder who's going to pop up
when
here.
When it comes to free agency, sometimes dollar signs make the rosters. But why is the business side of free agency so important? My next two panelists will have the answers. Joining me are David Shynock and Robert Haynes. David is a League of Legends content creator on TikTok and a senior financial analyst in the media and entertainment industries. And Robert is a co-owner of the Game House and covers TSM on Talking TSM, along with anything else LCS related on the Game House. David and Robert, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So my first question for you,
Oh, no video
I kind
yet.
of covered
Damn.
it a little bit in the intro, but we all know that the relationship between the players and teams exists.
First time I'm hearing
What
this
other
back since we
relationships
recorded,
do
so I'm
teams in the
curious to
esports
see.
industry have?
Curious to
There's
see how this
a
goes.
lot of different relationships that go on within, how these teams, I guess, operate, especially with brands. I think that that's probably one of the biggest relationships that maybe doesn't get talked about nearly as much. We know some of the big ones, and especially lately with, I think, major insurance companies like State Farm being so involved in the LCS. But
State
I
Farm
would say
assist of the
that
week.
That is probably, I don't know about you, David, but I would say that's probably the one that gets maybe talked about a lot, but not like actually known. Or there's not much known about them and how long some of them are.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just the relationship and kind of circle that you have
The
between
fuck is this guy?
players and the fans and the organization, and then the organization and its owners, and how that all interconnects with each other. You're ultimately driving revenue from the various different places. Like, your fans need to buy the merch, need to buy apparel, need to watch your content to be able to help feed into advertising dollars, which helps pay for everything. This industry doesn't just run on good times and happy vibes. It costs money to do everything.
That should be a shirt, by the
that's
way.
Often forgot about
LCS good
just
times and
because of
happy
the fact
vibes.
That people are always like, oh, well, why is this team not spending money, right? Why are they not doing these things? And like you said, there's that triangle that requires so much more, I think, attention, and something that the fans really don't dive into nearly enough. And it's not, to be fair, their fault necessarily on that. It's not something that's readily available or known most of the time, because esports teams still like to lack transparency on anything monetarily to most degrees, unless if they raise
Never want to talk about money.
funding amount, and then they're like, hey, look at all the money that we just raised, and you have no idea where it's going to go towards.
To be fair, business isn't also the sexiest topic in the world, depending on who you ask. Like, there are some people that are going to be that look at that State Farm deal and be like, okay, that's a lot of money. This is great. Let's go. And there's another group of people, probably the majority, that just look at it and are like, so when does Double Lift play?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it really is. And I think it's not an indictment on the fans necessarily, but it is something that I know I struggle with when I'm having conversations with people who are not business minded or business focused, because they will misunderstand when I say, hey, like, there's not going to be money on this team. Like, they just don't have the ability to do these certain things. And then when they
Real quick, I'm gonna do a poll. Do you care about the business side of the LCS? Yes, I want to talk money, or no, when does Double Lift play? I'm genuinely curious to see what people
announce
think.
something
The question's in chat
like
now.
us being bought by the Florida Panthers, and I say, wow, this team's potentially going to have a lot more funds available to them because they have a new ownership group that is excited and clearly invested into them. Some people don't understand that can be a massive driver, and I think that that's a relationship, Jay, between brands, between just the money that's coming in, and I think maybe the lack of understanding at times for certain fan bases and certain groups.
Mm-hmm. Robert, you mentioned a good point about advertising, and I feel like, David, I know this is a field that you extensively work in the financial district. How much does advertising play a role into whether it be, I know like the LCS has its own advertising, but for teams especially, they have advertised deals. You see it with like keyboards that they play with, or just general content. Would you mind kicking off just like explaining a little bit about why advertising, especially when it's getting closer to this start of the season, is so important?
Absolutely. So there's your main revenue drivers are always going to be the things that fund your league, that give you the ability to do everything that we're doing. In traditional sports, your three main areas are your sponsorships, your media rights deals, which media rights is basically selling the right for people to watch your product. ESPN, ABC, CBS, all of them will pay the various different companies that put on these sports to be able to have the rights to show it. Riot Games currently doesn't have a media rights deal, so there's no revenue to be had there. So we're still left with sponsorships. And then you have ticket sales and food and beverage. Given that the LCS only has a very small studio in LA, which doesn't always sell out, and then you also only travel on the road twice a year, that's not a significant portion of your revenue stream either. So the only thing that you are purely relying on to drive in the majority of your revenue to keep all this alive is your sponsorships. So whenever we have these big brand deals like State Farm, like I think it's Rawcat, when you have Spotify and all these other brands like MasterCard as well, they're the ones ultimately keeping the ship alive until we can find ways to drive other revenue streams.
And to like add on to that, right? We saw with the Overwatch League, they tried to hit all three all at once, right? They tried to go on the road.
Yep.
They did recently a media deal with YouTube that has ostracized some certain fans. And obviously they had the sponsorship things. Now,
It is Robert.
I don't like David's saying, I think that you need all three eventually. And I think as the LCS and as the league matures, because as much as everybody in esports wants to be like, oh, the LCS is 10 years old, wow, like that's so great, right? When we're talking about sports leagues, things that last, right? Baseball's over 120 years old. Okay, we are talking.
You want to know how old golf is? The Open Championship, the oldest sports tournament, or the oldest golf tournament in the world, had their 150th tournament this past year in 2022. 150 years. And people are going to sit here and say that the LCS is already, like, we're old and we should have all this shit figured out. 150? No, we're young still. Like, chill.
Talking about baby steps at the most for where the LCS is right now. And so I do think bringing up media rights, something I hadn't really thought about recently. I remember a conversation about it with somebody a couple years ago, but I do think that's one that realistically the LCS should be looking at. I think League of Legends in general, I know that it can technically, cut off access, but that's a huge selling point. Like every year the NFL and I like to bring
Note
in
the
traditional
Overwatch,
sports, 'cause I know everybody else hates it, but
flag
in
in the
terms
back
of the way
too.
that some of the business things are done, it is something you have to look at, right? Because regardless of what people want to talk about with advertising, with any money that comes in business wise, this is an entertainment business industry. They are there
Yep.
to entertain you, and they need
Yes.
money to be able to do it. And so
Yes.
having a media rights deal every year for baseball, for the NBA, for the NFL, right? That actually goes up so much that they can increase, like in the NFL, the cap increase is sometimes, not always, but mostly based around when they get a new media rights deal, because then there's more
Yep.
money funneled into the league. I really love that David brought that up, because I think that would be something that the LCS should seriously look at, because that would be a huge revenue driver in a way that I think a lot of people wouldn't really consider for the LCS to make a ton more money.
I think we're still a ways off of a
I
media
agree.
rights deal
I agree.
because there's so many other changes happening to the ecosystem right now. We have format changes and potential additional tournaments coming to the global League of Legends ecosystem. The LCS is potentially moving days. Like you have a lot of different moving pieces that we still don't know what's happening. If you throw a media rights deal on top of that and say, hey, you can no longer watch it at this spot that you used to previously watch it for, whether that's Twitch, YouTube, or we have no clue what that deal would look like. You're just adding more levers of change that you can't isolate year over year what actually happened. So, for example, say we have a 30% drop in viewership this year. This is a completely made up number, but the only thing we did was move days. We can isolate it to just that variable.
Sure.
When you change a lot of things all at once, then you can no longer say, okay, what happened? Was it the days or was it this? We have no clue. So I think we're still a ways off until we were comfortable enough to pull the trigger on that one.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I don't disagree with that at all. I think the only problem is that the LCS.
To be clear, I would love to see a media rights deal. I don't think esports fans are ready for it yet. For some reason, we have this dumb, like fucked up mentality that that we deserve everything for free. And there should never be any paywalls. You should never have to pay to watch anything or contribute in any way, shape, or form. I just don't see a sustainable pathway if you don't. You have to either sign a media rights deal at some point, or who's a potential buyer? Twitch and YouTube. And you do see NFL football is on Twitch now. Amazon bought Thursday Night Football and streams it on Twitch as well as on any like Amazon products. So these companies like Google and Amazon have the money to be able to spend for this. But it's the LCS fans that I worry that are going to leave en masse. Say we sign a media rights deal with YouTube specifically. You are then forcing every single person that watches it on Twitch to watch it on YouTube. Or you can go to the LoL esports site and that will automatically tune or have you watch it there via the YouTube stream. But I don't think fans are ready for that yet. I think people are still going to cause too many problems with it that it's not worth the money that you're going to get. At least not right now. But then that continues to contribute to the problem that we don't have enough money coming in, enough revenue streams besides just sponsorships themselves. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing.
And realistically, League as a whole, outside of Worlds, changes way too often. They are constantly making knee-jerk reactions. And I'm not saying that potential movement of days or anything else, right? Especially with what was discussed in Travis Gafford's interview with.
I'm not saying pay-per-view. Maybe you do like lock-in tournament pay-per-view, but I think even that's very flawed. I think you're just better off selling the rights to like YouTube or Twitch.
The way that they were looking at the numbers, I think, was super important. And so I just worry that the LCS and realistically leagues in general really are too quick to make changes. And I feel like at some point, right, because like, you're not wrong. I think right now, if they were to do a media deal, like, and they were to announce it over this offseason, I would say it's a huge mistake. But I think if they don't do something like that in the next couple of years,
Agreed.
then I do think they're missing out on a major revenue driver. And I do also believe that
I've watched LCS
just
on
know
YouTube
that there's
since
gonna be that
2018,
time,
and I've never
at
pulled up
least
Twitch
initially,
once.
right? That
It's been
you're gonna
phenomenal.
be able to do it in a I don't know, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, here's the thing. It's not a big ask if you're just asking people to watch on YouTube. It's really not hard. It's not. It's just people are gonna be so fickle about it, and they're gonna bitch and be like, "Oh, I just don't want to. Sorry." Like,
Let's say.
I think
There's
that leads
a
into
business
great
to be
segue
had
with the
here.
teams
Sorry.
themselves. We understand how the LCS has a bigger ecosystem of advertising and media deals and business partners going about. But one of the things I think is important, and I think David said it best in one of his TikToks, there is definitely a budget shift in the LCS. I was talking to Jacob Wolf earlier in our show, and he
I think
said
you
that
guys
there
might like
will
this topic.
definitely be some budget issues with some teams. Robert, I'll start with you on this question. How much do you think these outside business deals interfere with like the roster decisions of the LCS?
I think it depends. I mean, if you're talking about outside business deals as in how much money are they bringing in, right?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to. Yes.
Then yeah, I mean they are, I think, massive because none of us really know the rev split that is between all the LCS teams. I believe I could have missed it, but
reportedly 2 to 3 million from the LCS.
Oh yeah, that's right.
To individual teams reported by Travis Gafford.
That is right. I apologize. Yeah, I mean, listen, that money is probably dedicated to something pretty individually for most teams. And obviously they have to make money.
They
That
do,
can't
but
just be
C9's massive
$3
deals are
million.
split across
It's
all
just
their teams and
throwing
content
straight the
creators.
roster.
It's not just League of Legends.
So I think that some of these deals on the outside are what helps them, and it is really, again, it's an interesting dichotomy between traditional sports and sports, right? A lot of these teams in sports, all of the money that goes to them goes technically towards the team. These organizations, most of them at least, have multiple teams in multiple esports. So a deal like, for example, FTX, right, falling through for TSM, while TSM are continuously reiterating that they are a stable business, which I do believe, especially seeing some of the moves that people have been chastising them for at times, to be honest with you, letting go staff in different areas. I believe that that deal was more for, and I think I've put it out there on Twitter too a couple times, that deal was more important for growth. It wasn't necessarily for stability. And I do think that
Yep.
these outside deals are going to be they are important for, I think, a couple different reasons, and one of them being
TSM claims that they are still
attached to
stable,
the
and we have no
players,
evidence
right?
to prove
And you have
otherwise.
a better roster and everything like that. There may be more brand deals that come in, which thus allows you to take that money and put it elsewhere.
Did it pay out though? We don't know.
It's a really complicated
We'll never know.
question, to be honest with you, because there is so much that goes into the
These are the
roster
things that will
building and
never
the
become
amount of money
public,
that comes
ever.
in, and whether or not that outside money is even, like, again, if TSM signs a deal with Bitcoin or something like that next, right? Just to give an example, that money
Imagine
that
if they did.
sign
I
may not
swear.
necessarily go
That'd be
towards
hilarious.
the LCS at all. It may go towards other teams, esports, their new facility that they're building.
Reggie doesn't even own a house at this point. He's already sold
It's
it.
really tough to know because we don't know the inner workings of the teams, to be honest with you. And I know that's probably not the answer most people are looking for, but yeah, it could impact it significantly or not at all.
And it also depends on the deliverables of the deal as well.
Yep.
You guys
Steve
might like
was
this.
very public for Team Liquid, talking about how when they missed Worlds, there were certain deliverables that they had with their various partners that they're simply not going to be able to give them, which means that you either A, have to come up with something else to give to your sponsor to make sure that they feel validated in the money that they're giving you, or you have to give the money back if you've already accepted it. Like, there's a lot of inner workings of these deals. We don't ultimately know what happens individually with each one, but different organizations are going to use their money differently. Some might use it for growth. Some might use it to fund their current operations. Some of them might use it elsewhere in the business. It's very difficult to tell, but the one thing that we can tell from the market as a whole right now is that the amount of cash that is out there to be received from sponsors is dropping consistently. You're not being able to deliver, like, Doublelift having 2 million followers on Twitter meant a lot 2 years ago, or like 3 or 4 years ago. Nowadays, if he's not in as much content for whatever team he goes to or anything else like that, then is his brand value really as high as we used to make it out to be?
Yeah,
Question
and
changes.
yeah, and I think to add on to that too, another area that I know we haven't discussed yet is investments, right? That outside money has been the driver for esports and teams for at least the last 7 to 10 years, right? And if you've noticed, all of these teams that went out and got these big crypto deals and stuff like that, that was similar to the amount of money that they were receiving from investors in Series A's, B's, and C's. And those aren't happening right now. And there's a very I don't think that that's also being talked about nearly at all
It's
right
not.
now. But when was the last time
It's
you
not
saw
at all.
a team get a major funding round? You know, they're
Like
still
3
wanting to
years
do it,
ago,
and
I
they've
think?
been operating their businesses based off of this scaling model that is
The point on Doublelift is an example. The point is that to any player that has a massive social media following, the whole point of that is that you can use that following to advertise to other people. Doublelift might not be the best example because he streams and does everything else in that regard, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of who's a pro player that has an absurdly high following that doesn't really get to do much with it. I don't know. Double is probably still the best example. Like 100 Thieves, for example, will book sponsors and advertising deals under the assumption that Doublelift will be in those videos to then deliver a certain amount of audience to, say, I don't know, picking a random brand, fucking, I don't know, Kleenex. Say they're trying to sell Kleenex, or Kleenex is in winter, and you see Doublelift, like, advertising the product right here. It's like, yeah, that's going to deliver a certain amount of clicks. But if teams aren't putting out content, and less people are watching said content, regardless of whether the big names are in it or not, then you can't promise as much. Even though Doublelift has 2 million followers, if that video is only going to get 40 to 50,000, then you're not converting on that audience that Doublelift has to bring over to you.
Having all this
Team Liquid and
investment money
Bjergsen,
prop them
great
up.
example
If
where
you
it's like
can't be profitable
they did
on your
content last
own
year, but it did
after
not
all
have the
that money
viewership
is
that old
gone,
content used to.
then that's gonna
Otherwise,
create a
people would be
big
talking
issue
about it.
in the ecosystem. And that's why, even though as much as people hated the fact that some of the teams were owned by NBA teams, to be honest, they were kind of some of the safest ones because they were a part of an ownership group that was pretty stable in some other area. So it's really, investment is another thing that I think we have to be talking about, because a lot of the growth and a lot of the money that we saw from Team Liquid, from Cloud9, from TSM, from 100 Thieves, Evil Geniuses, right? A lot of that came from series funding rounds that you're not seeing right now, especially in a global recession or oncoming global recession, depending on your point of view.
So earlier in the conversation, we mentioned Doublelift, and Doublelift's a very well-known player.
It's how you get the
When
clicks,
you make
baby.
these roster changes, do you think like signing bigger names like Doublelift or maybe other massive names bring certain deals that were previously inaccessible?
It depends.
It's okay, Sledge. I get it. It's
I
fine.
mean, like David was talking about earlier, deliverables I think are a pretty important part of some of these deals for these people. Now, I think endemic, like the difference between endemic and non-endemic, like brands and advertising, I think is extremely.
I'm not sure what
important,
you
right?
mean,
If you go
Vex.
to somebody, if you go to, I think a good example of this was back when Gillette was doing a deal with Bjergsen, right? It was pretty clear because a lot of their branding, right, is based around popular individuals, right? So Tom Brady's, I don't know, whatever actors they're
Like
feeling
Tom Brady,
it's
Roger
not just
Federer,
necessarily that, hey, we have
etc.
a team or a league that's part of the brand. It was an
I agree,
individual
Panta, and I'm gonna
that was a
try
part of
and
the brand.
use some of these
So
clips on
with
my
TSM
TikTok wherever
working
like
with
I'm speaking,
Bjergsen, obviously at the
because
time,
I feel
Gillette
fine
was
using myself.
technically a part of
But
the
beyond
TSM
that,
deal, right? I'm sure that had
not
a
sure if
major
Jay's still in
influence on the
chat,
way
but
they
definitely
wanted to do
put
things.
clips out
But for
there
things
on
like,
Twitter.
I don't know, Alienware, right? I don't think they particularly care what player it is that they are doing, like if that, like that's going to impact them, because they believe, I'm sure their marketing plan is more of, if we are, you know, a brand and or a brand that's a part of all 10 LCS teams, that's great for us. We
I'm
don't
not sure
need to
who's
have
involved
just
with the
one
FTX from the
individual
NBA side.
kind of drive that. And I think that that is, I mean, a Doublelift may be a little different just because of how big his stream is.
Yeah.
I think
That
if
double
you're
is
using
going to
that
be an
as
anomaly,
example,
not the
because
rule.
if you can get your
Always
brand
has
on
been,
his
always will
stream,
be.
that's a lot more valuable than just being attached to Someday on whatever team Sunday is going to end up being on, right? But I think those are few and far between right now, especially in the LCS.
It also depends on what you're signing that partnership for. For example, a lot of the original deals that we would see, or at least that we heard of, were for content.
Mhm.
You sign a deal, you give a certain amount of money, the partner is always listed as a sponsor of the video, and then it would either be on the documentary series or the other supplemental pieces that came out. Given that we've seen pretty much the evaporation of content as budgets get cut across the various LCS orgs, you're then also having a direct effect on sponsorships as well, because then when you're trying to sell your brand to them, when you're going into these meetings and you have your pitch deck, and normally what would be a component of like, we got X amount of views, certain engagement rate, and you're pitching your content, well, it all disappeared. So now like that avenue that you can potentially book a sponsorship for, even with a player like Doublelift, is in limbo.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is now kind of a good segue into something you guys made sure that we want to talk about.
Exactly.
That is the
Nobody ever
investment
will
side
be
of
a
things.
Doublelift.
especially as we get
Likely
closer
ever
to,
again.
closer and closer to free agency.
At least
when you
within
see
North
some of
American
these
League.
deals being
You might have
signed.
somebody
I think
similar
one
in
of
a
the big ones
different
that
game,
comes to
but not
mind
in
is
League.
when C9 made that massive investment into Perks and had to make sure essentially their investors knew what they were getting into. When it comes to free agency and when it comes to the budgets, how much do investments play a role into securing the funding, but also making sure that they keep themselves afloat?
I mean, for right now, it shouldn't be anything at all because they're not getting any investments. But I do think that we saw with
I
new
said
teams coming
LCS
into
for
the
a
league
reason,
and with
Vex.
because like when new orgs joined in like 2019 and well, obviously like 2017 when everything got started, but when 2019 we had the 3 new orgs that came in, all of them raised a Series A or B round, I believe, right around the time that they were joining because they needed that money not only to buy the spot, but then they decided probably to invest in and get talent, right?
Which is what
I
FlyQuest
think
is
Evil
doing right now.
Geniuses was a prime example of this when they went out and got Bang and the rest of the crew that ultimately didn't do a whole lot. I think
Yes.
nowadays investments shouldn't be included or thought about really at all in terms of these roster signings. And I don't also believe, to be clear, I do not believe that this is necessarily affecting the market right now. I do believe that recessionary times are more important, and people have to understand these are businesses. They are having to run at as close to even at, I guess, at a minimum as they can. They still obviously want to be so far in the black that they're making money, but they don't want to dip into the red. And
Bingo.
if the decision between risking it to sign 2 more players for $500,000 more each is going to put you further in the red than you are comfortable, then sure, that's going to affect it. And obviously, if they all raised another $100 million in a Series B or C round, then sure, I'm pretty positive that these LCS rosters would have more money put behind them. But I think that these orgs are starting to become businesses, not just startup.
Yes.
Eternal.
As they have
growth
to be. You have to
mechanisms that
start
they've been
making
in the
money from
past.
all this shit.
And so there's
People fail to realize that. They're like, oh, they
part of the
want
community
happy
that
times and
was
good
used
vibes. Well,
to
happy
the
times and
amount
good
of
vibes
that
cost
was being
money.
thrown at all of this when all the initial raises happened. But I don't know that we will, at least in the next year or two, see that. It may be ever, honestly. It really just depends, because at some
Could be
point,
ever.
all the people who have invested are not they're not going to want to get diluted anymore, and they're also not going to want to see
Bingo.
these companies
Investors
have to
want their
operate
money
on
back.
every 3 years getting new major investments in order to just survive, because that's just not a stable business. That's just throwing money down a bottomless pit that will eventually just hit the bottom when there is no foundation there whatsoever.
And that's the key thing here is, like you said, whenever everybody came in 2017, you get all these investment rounds that come in. That money ultimately is due back. They're not just giving you millions of dollars to say, here, have fun with it. Like, the expectation is they're giving you, say, $5 million to get you $5 million plus interest after a certain amount of time. And it is now publicly known that nobody's gotten their money back in that capacity. So the reason why you're seeing all these budget cuts, why you're seeing all these teams, as you said, become businesses, start to cut back, try to break even, is because that money is owed back to investors. And if you clearly were not driving the revenue and not driving the attention that people thought it would. And at some point, that has to come back down to earth. Now, you'll see FlyQuest, because they just got into it, raise money, spend it as always. But in 4 to 5 years, we'll be having the same exact conversation unless something major changes.
Yeah, and I think that's the important word, is changes, right? There are ways for these LCS teams to...
We
I mean,
cannot...
Again, we
the
already talked about,
LCS
right?
at its current path is not sustainable for investors. You will just continue to keep recycling teams over and over and over again until we run out of options and then everything dies. You have to make it sustainable.
They're bringing in $3 million in splitting that revenue. I'm sure, like, across the LCS. The bigger deals and everything else that we've talked about, the more money that is poured into it, the better things are going to be for these LCS orgs, because then they can start to operate more like true businesses. And listen, I don't think there's been a better time for these LCS teams to kind of go through this, to be honest. These growing pains and these budget cuts are going to establish who's going to be around for the next 10, 20 years plus, hopefully, right? There will be orgs in the next year or two. They may not be LCS orgs, but there will be orgs that are going to
Yeah,
die
Josh,
from
we
this.
talked about
They
that a
will
little
no
bit
longer
earlier.
exist because they've been operating under the assumption that they can just raise eternally, and they didn't come up with a good enough business plan to create that stable foundation. I'm not saying that the LCS teams are going to do this. I actually know from different sources that like FlyQuest was actually operating pretty well within their means. They always had been. I just think that the deal was too good for the Milwaukee Bucks group to pass up, because it seemed like they were floating it out there, and the Florida Panthers gave them a deal that they were excited about, right?
I say that they couldn't say no to.
There are other teams in the ecosystem that are likely going to either have to sell or want to sell. And I think that we would have seen some more change in the LCS, but the spot was not worth the initial, 10 to $30 million.
Moneyball, that was CLG this past year. That was literally them. They took budget players all around with some good promising rookies that had decent stats, and nearly made. Granted, they finished 6th after playoffs, but like obviously had a very high ceiling. Moneyball is 100% possible if done right and scouted right, but it takes absurdly good scouting to get there, and then good coaching on top of that.
That were invested into it, so they decided to pause on that. So we'll have to see. This coming year will probably be more determinant to almost to the value of these spots and the position of the league going forward, more than any other season, most likely. And I don't think that we're heading, as much as other people are going to say we're heading down a bad path for it, I don't think that we are. Seeing these teams cut some budgets, invest more into talent across leagues. I would prefer NA, but there are still young players coming around from other leagues, I would assume, at some point here too, that are, in that 17, 18, 19-year-old range. Those investments are going to pay off, and that's what allows, this league needed a reset. This is a very necessary reset that I think that we are seeing. I know that's I know that's diving way deeper than what your initial question was, Jay, but I do think it is absolutely an important aspect of the business that we just have to talk about. People aren't talking about it. It needs to be talked about.
And it's the nature of the markets too. So one of the things that you see beyond just esports across all of business in general is that you never want to show weakness until everybody else does. And when they do, you dump all of your problems at once. It's basically a one-time, not get out of jail free card, but you want to keep projecting good growth, good earnings. All of a sudden, everybody needs to shed some dead weight. Dump all of our problems. You have a 6-month to year-long window to just say, okay, here's all of our problems. You'll see layoffs. You'll see everything else. You'll see everybody shedding what they consider their dead weight. And then from that point on, growth. You got to get back to it. That's the ebb and flow that comes with business. The LCS is in that point right now where we're trying to shed as much weight as possible.
Right.
All right, let me show you guys a graph here for those that don't understand how economies work. Normal economic growth graph. Trying to see. I don't remember the name of it or what it was called. I mean, you could actually, let me just look up Google stock, because they're probably the best indicator long term. See how it steadily grows here? Well, within these individual areas, even though it's growing, there's a lot of dips. And those dips are where economies, where everybody else just sheds weight. The company might be going through bad times, but a lot of times it's also like general issues as well. For example, the dip here in March 2020, COVID happened. Everybody's shedding dead weight. All companies are affected because you're under the assumption, okay, we need to get it out now because then we're going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then all of a sudden, dropped again. And then you shed dead weight again. And it's just like,
It is not a straight line up, even though it looks straight, considering we're viewing it from a very far off perspective. When you zoom in, there's a lot of peaks and valleys. That's normal. It's supposed to happen. So when people are like, oh, the LCS is dropping off a bit, that's normal. It's supposed to happen. Sustained growth takes decades to get to. You're going to have these times where it feels like everything's dropping. And granted, this is the first time for a slightly extended period of time that we've dealt with this. But the question is, how do you rebound? If you can get to that rebound on the other side, then great, you keep going. But if this is the peak and then you start dropping and never find a way on the other side, then yeah, it can be a problem. So it is normal to go through the cycles that we are going through with the LCS right now. That is perfectly fine, as long as we come out better on the other side. That's why decisions being made during these times are so important and have ripple effects.
Right. I do want to ask one last question, because I know we've kind of gone from a wide variety of topics, but I do want to kind of circle back to why we're here. We're talking about the free agency. And I know for some people, the money side of things is a little confusing. So I want to give each of you just one, if you had to pick one example or one thing that someone who may not understand the business side of this free agency period should know, what do you think is the most important thing that they should know going into Tuesday night?
I would say the most important thing to watch for, and I get flamed a lot on my own content for this, but I do think watching the ages of the players that are being signed is going to be a major indicator of what the team's plans are, not only obviously for this year, but moving forward as well. And this includes not just on the main team, but in academy teams. I think ages are going to very much determine how serious some of these teams are about the LCS,
Especially
and
on the
changes that
academy
may be
teams,
coming
yes.
For how they operate within them. If you see both main teams and academy teams with like 23 plus players at most of the positions, then that to me is a major red flag of their actual investment into the future. And
I wonder what org might
that's
be.
what's gonna be. That's what I will be watching on Tuesday. Outside of just the talent, right? Because everybody's gonna look at the talent, whatever. But player ages in esports matter as much or more than almost any other form of sports entertainment right now because of how short they generally are. So if some teams are just going for it to exist right in the middle, you might see a bunch of 23 to 28-year-old players whose futures
It also
with the
depends off a lot. So
organization
this is a
makes
lot
that
more
may not
nuanced
extend past
conversation
one or
to
two
have than
splits,
the little
or
time
maybe three if
here.
the LC,
But he has a point.
LCS goes what the LEC is doing. So yeah, for me, ages. I'm obsessed with watching it because it does, I think, show the potential and growth for the not only the teams but the LCS as a whole as well.
I don't even remember what I said. I'm primarily looking on Tuesday to see, are these going to be entertaining rosters? I think the biggest problem that the LCS has at the moment is that we're trapped under this idea that if we don't win worlds and we're not competitive on the world stage, then nothing we do matters. And I think that's just entirely wrong and false. We have to be comfortable with the fact that we might not ever hit that stage, and find entertainment and find value in our region independently. And having rosters that people can get excited about, with all the cost savings, with everything else that's going to come in. Just, you want to be able to put 5 players out there that people want to talk about on social media, and want to get involved with, and want to go out to these events and see. I just want rosters that people genuinely like. And I think a lot of that, as shown by 100 Thieves last year, was that they had a team that made finals 3 splits in a row. It drove little to no fan engagement at all. And I don't expect that to be the case this year.
All right, with that, that's all the questions I have. Robert and David, thank you so much for this very informative side of things. As someone who doesn't come from a business background, it definitely answered a lot of questions that I had, because I have no idea about finances in esports. So thank you so much for really bringing this conversation.
I just want the league to be entertaining.
Different light for me personally and for our viewers.
Thank you for having us on, man. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Is this who I think it is up next?
We've taken a look at the teams and we've taken a look at the business side of things, but who are the ones that actually cover the news? For that, we turn to members of the third-party media representing
never mind.
the LCS. Joining me now are Faisal Morali and Nick Geraci. Faisal Morali is a music major who was at the right place at the right time, and his work can be found at theclick.gg. Over the better part of the last decade, Nick Geraci has developed a unique voice in the League esports space as a columnist, built relationships with premier organizations, told captivating stories through interviews and features, and authored...
Okay. There's another hour of this that I'm probably gonna save until tomorrow, either tomorrow or Wednesday, to watch on stream, given that I do not have full time, quite frankly, to go through this entire thing. I've already been live for how long? Little over what? We started this at 5, so right around 2 hours. Josh, free agency doesn't start until tomorrow, on Tuesday, the 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. Or no. Wait, no, does it start tonight or tomorrow? I'm confused. I thought it was I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but nevertheless. I want to skip to the end, though, because I know, like, the thing, so you have journalism talked about here, and then you have the fan perspective with Numi, or Angie, who was it? Angie, who all was it? It was Angie, Delphi. Oh, it's just 2 of them. Okay. I want to skip to the end here because some backstory behind this.
Yes, thank you for inviting us to be on.
The backstory behind this, and I hope Jay does not mind me showing this, but I thought this was a really cool clip. For those that don't know, Delphi is a massive 100 Thieves fan, as am I, obviously. And I got asked to speak like on behalf of like expectations for 100 Thieves fans going into next year. And that unfortunately meant that Delphi didn't get to do it.
Please let me know. Also,
But the expectation is set pretty high before I even show the clip of what I said.
please let me know. Also, Delphi, I'm very sorry, but David is a massive 100 Thieves fan. If he didn't do the 100 Thieves,
Oh my gosh. I was like, the only person who could be more qualified on this panel to do 100 Thieves is David Shina.
Yeah, I'm very sorry.
No,
So the expectation is high coming into this, and I promise, Angie, I will watch your segment tomorrow on stream. I just don't have enough time to do it tonight because I have to end the stream here in like 10 minutes to let the dogs out, go get food, and a bunch of other stuff. I honestly did not think this was going to be 2.5 hours long. I thought this was going to be like an hour-long thing in total. But here's my final words on behalf of all of our final words on the teams, but more specifically, 100 Thieves.
I had a good time.
Here we go. This is the year that 100 Thieves becomes one of the top fandoms in the LCS. We've had good results for years now. We've made finals, 3 back-to-back splits, but yet we haven't had that fandom that feels like it rivals Cloud9 or TSM or any of these big names. We've spent years developing younger players like Kenvi, who went to Immortals, like Busio, like Tenacity, like Luger and Poom, who are now on CLG. We've had many players come from our ecosystem. And if EG showed last year, it's that these younger players that can act on behalf of your org and grow with your brand are so important. So if you take these younger players that we have and you put them with some high quality veterans that might be able to develop them into superstars, then you have a team that can take you into the skies and take you literally anywhere. Now, it has been rumored that we might get 2 big names with 100 Thieves. Maybe 2 of the biggest names to ever play in the LCS. Maybe 2 players that also were holding a trophy while walking down the middle of the Chicago venue. If that happens, and as a 100 Thieves fan, I'm praying to God, life is gonna be crazy. Even if that doesn't happen, we get somebody else. We have good talent to be developed, and this is one of those that you can jump on ship with being a 100 Thieves fan now and be happy through at least 2025, 2026, because we got Sniper in the wings as well.
All right, so I'll be talking about Cloud9 here. Cloud9's in a very interesting.
Tell me that doesn't at least do a decent job of hyping you up for 100 Thieves. Not only this year, but for the years to come. At least a little bit. I'm trying to see what other team do I want to watch now. That's what I'm talking about. I want to see what they said about what she said about EG.
On a shorter leash up.
I think with the pickup of Kelsey Moser as their head of coaches, they already won a massive part of it. Kelsey Moser is someone who
I pray to God that is true
She
too. I need to
watches
clip that and put that on
Pages. She's a big fan of
social media
academy and
right now,
development and
actually.
amateur, and I think her direction for the team is a good one, and I think it's really telling that Peter Dunn is like happy about this decision. On the fan side, I think what they can do to win off season is just keep Jojo Pyun. Jojo Pyun and Danny were fan favorites last year, or I guess this year, and keeping Jojo Pyun, like while Danny obviously is off the roster for reasons out of their control, keeping Jojo Pyun is the easiest way to keep fans. He's lovable. International fans absolutely adore him, and everybody likes him. There's nobody that genuinely is like, oh, I just hate Jojo Pyun.
I've actually met a few people that don't like Jojo Pyun, weirdly enough.
That's just not a thing that happens.
They find
And I
him to
think
be cocky.
If you keep Jojo Pyun on your team,
which
you
I don't
keep
get.
a massive portion of your fans that you gathered, especially like people who became fans of EG this year. So I think that's the two main ways that EG can win this offseason.
FlyQuest is definitely going.
Okay. We will watch the rest of this later. I have to end this. I have to remember I stopped just after our segment, so we have like another hour to go next time I come in. So everybody have a good night. Be sure, if you can do me a favor, if you guys, I'm trying to, where's my camera? If you guys have not already, please drop a like on his video itself. I haven't refreshed it, so I don't know what the viewership is at the moment.
And we don't like
what the
him,
likes
right?
are. Okay. Viewership's not bad, but just do me a favor. If you can go like the video itself, it's under Jay Silver on YouTube. I'll pull this up again. Jay Silver on YouTube. Just drop a like on the video. He spent a lot of time organizing this. He was the single reason why any of this happened, why we have some off-season content besides, actually, there's really not much else that's been out there. So massive credit goes to Jay, and thank you so much for having me on, man. I truly appreciate it. Thank you for letting me speak on behalf of 100 Thieves fans, as well as just speaking on the business side of LoL Esports. It's always a blast, and I will always enjoy these opportunities. So thank you, and I will catch you all either tomorrow or Wednesday. I'll tweet about it and post it on Hive as well. If you're not on Hive, might be the new Twitter. Who knows?